Hi, I'm Jenny, and I'm going to go over chapter 2 of Sinclair Lewis, It Can't Happen Here. Um, Before, like my first video, I said a lot, so I think I'm just going to read and then explain what I've learned because I basically had to go back to school to get through chapter 2 of this book. So, chapter 2 starts out, it says, as he took his wife. So just to as a reminder, chapter 2 starts um when with the after party from the Rotary Club dinner in chapter 1. So he's driving his wife home, and then he's going to go to this after party with the guys from the Rotary Club. As he took his wife home and drove up Pleasant Hill to Tasborough's. That's the guy that's giving the after party. And it will explain who Tasborough is in a little bit. Um, Doremus Jessup meditated upon the epidemic patriotism of General Edgeways, but he broke it off to let himself be absorbed in the hills, as it had been his habit for the 53 years out of his 60 years of life he had spent in Fort Beulah, Vermont. Legally a city, Fort Beulah was a comfortable village of old red brick and granite workshops, and houses of white clapboards or gray shingles, with a few smug little modern bungalows, yellow or seal brown. There was but little manufacturing, a small woolen mill, a sash and door factory, a pump works. The granite, which was its chief produce, came from quarries 4 miles away. In Fort Beulah itself were only the offices, all the money, the meager shacks of most of the quarry workers. It was a town of perhaps 10,000 souls, inhabiting about 20,000 bodies. The proportion of soul possession may be too high. So I'm not really sure what he means by this. I assumed uh, what he might mean before, but I I really don't know at this point. Um, there was but one comparative skyscraper in town, the six-story Tasboro building, with the offices of Tasboro and Scarlet Granite Quarries, the offices of Doremus's son-in-law, Fowler Greenhill, M.D., and his partner, Dr. Olmsted, of lawyer Mungo Kitterick, of Harry Kinderman, agent for maple syrup and dairying supplies, and of 30 or 40 other village samurai. It was a downy town, a drowsy town, a town of security and tradition, which still believed in Thanksgiving, Fourth of July, Memorial Day, and which May Day was not an occasion for labor parades, but for distributing small baskets of flowers. It was a May night late in May of 1936, with a three-quarter moon. Doremus's house was a mile from the business center of Fort Beulah on Pleasant Hill, which was a spur thrust like a reaching hand out from the dark, rearing mass of Mount Terror. Upland meadows, moon glistening, he could see among the wilderness of spruce and maple and poplar on the ridges far above him. And below, as the car climbed, was Ethan Creek, flowing through the meadows, deep woods, rearing mountain bulwarks, the air like spring water, serene clapboarded houses that remembered the War of 1812, and the boyhoods of those errant Vermonters. Stephen A. Douglas, the little giant. Stephen A. Douglas. I looked into him. He was, I think, senator of Illinois. He was from Vermont. Um, he tried to prevent the Civil War. And that's what he means by errant Vermonters, because each of these guys had their errors, their their erroneous ways of thinking, and they each of these guys did some really bad things, but they also um, were, like he said, bulwarks of the time that they lived. So basically, Stephen A. Douglas, he said that it wasn't politics' job to get into morals. to try to prevent the Civil War. Um, Hiram Powers. So this is the sentence. And the boyhoods of those errant Vermonters, Stephen A. Douglas, the Little Giant, and Hiram Powers, and Thaddeus Stevens, and Brigham Young, and President Chester Alan Carter. So Hiram Powers was a sculptor, and he's most well known for sculpting the Greek slave. And he did this work um, when right before the Civil War, when um, the whole country was divided on the 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 abolition of slavery. So he was an abolitionist, and I guess the reason why he had errors was because when he first started out, he really wasn't. But I think it's because he wasn't really he was an artist, so he didn't know a lot about it. Then he moved to Washington D.C. He learned more about it, and that's when he became an activist. So basically, this statue, if you Google it, it's called The Greek Slave. And what he wrote to accompany the statue, basically to describe um, his, the reason why or his theory behind his story behind it is the slave has been taken from one of the Greek islands by the Turks in the time of the Greek Revolution. Her father and mother, and perhaps all her kindred, have been destroyed by her foes. She is now among barbarian strangers, and she stands exposed to the gaze of the people she abhors, and awaits her fate with its intense anxiety, tempered by the support of her reliance upon the goodness of God. So the Greek slave is it's a parallel to slavery in America, and he's basically trying to make people put themselves in the position of people who were enslaved to increase the numbers of people that were abolitionists. And it did. The image spread like wildfire. It was on like all like people were making you know different basically memes of it. People used it for branding. He had to copyright it because they were using it on mint tins of mints. They would have like a picture of the of his sculpture. Thaddeus Stevens, he was a congressman, also an abolitionist under Abraham Lincoln. He was a congressman, and he died he died while in office um, under the presidency of Andrew Jackson, which he didn't like him, but he did a lot of stuff to abolish slavery. Um, Brigham Young, he was he was the Mormon guy who met Joseph Smith, and in Missouri, Joseph. So the Mormons, they were bringing the Mormons west, and in Missouri, Joseph Smith was executed, or he was murdered, because Missouri had passed a state law that the Mormons had to leave because they just didn't like the Mormons. I don't know a lot about the story. All I know is everybody, like the people of Missouri, just wanted the Mormons to leave. So um, they somebody murdered Joseph Smith, and then Brigham Young took over, and he led everybody to Utah, and he's the one who said, "This is where we're going to settle in Utah," and he there's some bad stuff about him too if you research a lot of stuff. President Chester Alan Carter. I'm sorry, President Chester Alan Arthur. He was the 21st president in 1881 to 1885, and he kind of like hid his true intentions on the way in. He was Republican, but back then they had this spoils system, which they still do today. But um, it's basically if you scratch my back, I scratch yours. And he was the vice president of Grover Cleveland, who was murdered, and then he took over office, and he immediately changed everything that people thought had was for, and he tried to do away with the spoils system. And he also brought our military up to modernization and built ships, and he did a lot of stuff. So he's considered one of the best presidents that we've had, since Lincoln. So um, anyway, the next paragraph, no powers and oh, sorry. He's thinking about what he just said, and he's like, no, Powers and Arthur, they were weak sisters, pondered Doremus, but Douglas and Thad Stevens and Brigham, the old stallion, I wonder if we're breeding up any paladins like those stout, grouchy old devils. If we're producing 'em anywhere in New England, anywhere in America, anywhere in the world. They had guts, independence, did what they wanted and thought what they liked, and everybody could go to hell. The youngsters today, oh, the aviators have plenty of nerve. The physicists, these 25-year-old PhDs that violate the inviolable atom, they're pioneers. But most of the wishy-washy and young people today going 70 miles an hour but not going anywhere, not enough imagination to want to go anywhere. Getting their music by turning a dial, getting their phrases from comic strips instead of from Shakespeare and the Bible and Veblen and old Bill Sumner, pap fed flaps, like the smug pup Malcolm Tasbro hanging around Sissy. Ah, wouldn't it be hell if that stuffed shirt edgeways and that political Mae West gimmick were right, and we need all these military monkey shines, and maybe a fool war to conquer some sticky hot country we don't want on a bet, and put some starch and git into these marionettes that we call our children. But rats, these hills, castle walls, and this air, they can keep their Cotswolds and Harz mountains. I didn't look up those terms. Should have. D. Jessup, topographical patriots, and I am a, and then his wife. This is funny, I think, because I don't know if he's talking out loud or if he's just like thinking in his head. And his wife, all of a sudden, she's a passenger, she's in the passenger seat. He still hasn't dropped her off, and she goes, "Dormouse, would you mind driving on the right hand side of the road, on curves anyway?" His wife peacefully. An upland hollow and mist beneath the moon, a veil of mist over apple blossoms, and the heavy bloom of an ancient lilac bush beside the ruin of a farmhouse burned these 60 years and more. Okay, so now he's at the after party. Mr. Francis Tasbro was the president, manager, and chief owner of the Tasbro and Scarlet granite quarries at West Beulah, 4 miles from the fort. He was rich, persuasive, and he had constant labor troubles. He lived a few he lived in a new Georgian brick house on Pleasant Hill, a little beyond Doremus Jessup's, and in that house he maintained a private bar room luxurious as that of a motor company's advertising manager at Grosse Pointe. It was no more the traditional New England than was the Catholic part of Boston, and Frank himself boasted that though his family had for 6 generations lived in New England, he was no tight Yankee, but in his efficiency and his salesmanship, the complete Pan American business executive. He was a tall man, Tasbro, with a yellow mustache and a monotonously emphatic voice. He was 54, 6 years younger than Doremus Jessup, and when he had been 4, Doremus had protected him from the results of his singular unpopular unpop singularly unpopular habit of hitting the other small boys over the head with things, all kinds of things: sticks, toy wagons, lunch boxes, and dry cow flops. Assembled in his private barroom tonight after the Rotarian dinner were Frank himself, Doremus Jessup, Metairie Cole the miller, superintendent of schools Emil Stobmeyer, R.C. Crowley, Roscoe Conkling Crowley, the weightiest banker in Fort Beulah, and rather surprisingly Tasbro's pastor, the Episcopal minister, the Reverend Mr. Falk. His old hands as delicate as porcelain, his wilderness of hair silk soft and white, his unfleshly face betoken the good life. Mr. Falk came from a solid Knickerbocker family, and I should have Googled that term too, because like when this book came out, all these references, when you read it, like you just, the the people that would have bought and read this book understood these references immediately, and now they're not really in our, we don't, like, we learn about a lot of them in school, but or at least I learned about a lot of them in school. And so when I read some of these names and these terms, I think, oh yeah, I've heard that before, but I didn't retain it, so I have to like go back and find out what it is. So I'm not really sure what Knickerbocker means, and if you actually have the tenacity to watch this video and you can please comment and let me know. Um, Anyway, so Reverend Falk was from a Knickerbocker family, and he had studied in Edinburgh and Oxford with the General Theological Seminary of New York. And in the Beulah Valley, there was, aside from Doremus, no one more contentedly hid away in the shelter of the hills. So this is the second time that he's referred to Fort Beulah, Vermont, as a castle walls shelter. I feel like this is foreshadowing. I've kind of skimmed the book, so I'm like rereading it in detail, one chapter at a time. So I feel like this is foreshadowing, but I guess we'll see later on. The barroom had been professionally interior decorated by a young New York gentleman with the habit of standing with the back of his right hand against his hip. It had a stainless steel bar, framed illustrations from La Vie Parisienne, silver metal tables, and chromium plated aluminum chairs with scarlet leather cushions. All of them except Tashbro, Metairie Cole, a social climber, to whom the favors of Frank Tasbro were as honey and fresh ripened figs, and Professor Emil Stobmeyer were uncomfortable in this parrot cage elegance. But none of them, including Mr. Falk, seemed to dislike Frank's soda and excellent scotch, or the sardine sandwiches. And I wonder if Thad Stevens would have liked this either, considered Doremus. He'd have snarled, old cornered catamount, but probably not at the whiskey. So I guess he was talking about Thaddeus Stevens. Doremus demanded Tasbro, "Why don't you take a tumble to yourself?" Oh, I'm sorry. Doremus, demanded Tasbro, "why don't you take a tumble to yourself? All these years you've had a lot of fun criticizing, always being against the government, kidding everybody, posing as such a liberal that you'll stand for all these subversive elements. Time for you to quit playing tag with these crazy ideas and come in and join the family. These are serious times. Maybe 28 million on relief and beginning to get ugly, thinking they've got a vested right now to be supported." The next paragraph, hopefully I don't get banned for reading this. And the Jew communist and the Jew financiers plotting together to control the country. I can understand how, as a younger fellow, you could pump up a little sympathy for the unions and even for the Jews, though, as you know, I'll never get over being sore at you for taking the side of the strikers when those thugs were trying to ruin my whole business, burning down my polishing and cutting shops. Why, you were even friendly with that alien murderer Carl Pascal, who started the whole strike. Maybe I didn't enjoy firing him when it was all over. Carl Pascal was a real guy. I looked him up, but and okay, I think he was Irish, and he was a no, that's the wrong guy. Anyway, he was a real guy. But anyway, these labor racketeers are getting together now with communist leaders and determined to run the country to tell men like me how to run our business. Just like General Edgeways said, they'll refuse to serve their country if we should happen to get dragged into some war. Yes, sir, a mighty serious hour. It's time for you to cut the cackle and join the really responsible citizens, said Doremus. Yes. I agree it is a serious time, with all the discontent here in this country to wash him into the office. Senator Windrip has got an excellent chance to be elected president next November, and if he is, probably his gang of buzzards will get us into some war, just to grease their insane vanity and show the world that we're the huskiest nation going, and then I, the liberal, and you, the plutocrat and bogus Tory, will be let out and uh blank at 3 a.m. Serious, huh? Rats. You're exaggerating, said R.C. Crowley. Doremus went on. If Bishop Prang, our Savonria, in a Cadillac 16, swings his radio audience and his league of forgotten men to Buzz Windrip, Buzz will win. People will think they're electing him to create more economic security, and then watch the terror. God knows there's been enough indication that we can have tyranny in America. The fix of the Southern sharecropper. Okay, I'm going to read this paragraph, and then I'll go back over the individual uh, things that he's talking about, because this paragraph is hopefully the most dense paragraph in the book. I don't know. So I'm just going to read it. God knows there's been enough indication that we can have tyranny in America. The fix of Southern sharecroppers, the working conditions of miners and garment makers, and our keeping Mooney in prison for so many years. But wait till Windrip shows us how to say it with machine guns. Democracy here in Britain and France. Democracy here in Britain and France. It hasn't been so universal a sniveling slavery as Nazism in Germany. Such an imagination-hating, Pharisaic materialism as Russia, even if it has produced industrialists like you, Frank, and the bankers like you, R.C., and given you altogether too much power and money. On the whole, with scandalous exceptions, democracy's given the ordinary worker more dignity than he ever had. That may be menaced now by Mr. Windrip, all the Windrips. All right, maybe we should have to fight paternal dictatorship with a little sound patricide. Fight the machine guns with machine guns. Wait till Buzz takes charge of us. A real fascist dictatorship. Nonsense, nonsense, snorted Tasbro. That couldn't happen here in America. Not possibly. We're a country of freemen. The answer to that, suggested Doremus Jessup, if Mr. Falk will forgive me, is the hell it can't. Why, there's no country in the world that can get more hysterical, and yes, more obsequious than America. Look how Huey Long became an absolute monarch over Louisiana, and how the Right Honorable Mr. Senator Berzelius Windrip owns his state. Listen to Bishop Prang and Father Coughlin on the radio, divine oracles to millions. Remember how casually most Americans have accepted Tammany grafting and Chicago gangs, and the crookedness of so many of President Harding's appointees? Could Hitler's bunch or Winthrop's be worse? Remember the Ku Klux Klan? Remember our war hysteria? Remember when we called sauerkraut liberty cabbage and somebody actually proposed calling German measles liberty measles? And wartime censorship of honest papers? Bad as Russia. Remember our kissing the feet of Billy Sunday, the $1 million evangelist, and of Amy McPherson, who swam from the Pacific Ocean clear to the Arizona desert and got away with it? Remember Voliva and Mother Eddy? Remember our Red Scares and our Catholic Scares, and all the well-informed people knew that the OGPU were hiding out in Oskaloosa, and the Republicans campaigning against Al Smith told the Carolina Mountaineers that if Al won, the Pope would illegitimize their children. Remember Tom Heflin and Tom Dixon? Remember when the Hick legislator in certain states, in obedience to William Jennings Bryan, who learned his biology from his pious old grandma, set up shop as scientific experts and made the whole world laugh itself sick by forbidding the teaching of evolution? Remember the Kentucky night riders? Remember how trainloads of people have gone to enjoy lynchings? Not happen here? Prohibition, shooting down people just because they might be transporting liquor? No, that couldn't happen in America. Why, where in all history has there ever been a people so ripe for a dictatorship as ours? We're ready to start on a children's crusade, only of adults. Right now, the Right Reverend Abbot Winthrop and Prang are all ready to lead it. Well, what if they are? Protested R.C. Crowley. It might not be so bad. I don't like all these irresponsible attacks on us bankers all the time. Of course, Senator Winthrop has to pretend publicly to bawl the banks out, but once he gets into power, he'll give the banks their power and influence in the administration and take our expert financial advice. Yes, why are you so afraid of the word fascism, Doremus? Just a word, just a word. And might not be so bad with all the lazy bums we got panhandling relief nowadays and living on my income tax and yours. Not not so worse to have a real strong man like Hitler or Mussolini, like Napoleon or Bismarck in the good old days, and have them really run the country and make it efficient and prosperous again. In other words, have a doctor who won't take back take any back chat, but really boss the patient and make him get well whether he likes it or not. Yes, said Emil Staubmeier. Didn't Hitler give Germany didn't Hitler save Germany from the Red Plague of Marxism? I got cousin there. I know. Said Doremus. As often as Doremus did say it, cure the evils of democracy by the evils of fascism. Funny therapeutics. I've heard of curing syphilis by giving the patient malaria, but I've never heard of their curing malaria by giving the patient syphilis. Think that's nice language to use in the presence of Reverend Falk? Raged Tasbro. Mr. Falk piped up. I think it's quite nice language, and an interesting suggestion, Brother Jessup. Besides, said Tasbro, this chewing the rag is all nonsense, anyway. As Crowley says, it might be a good thing to have a strong man in the saddle, but it just can't happen here in America. And it seemed to Doremus that the softly moving lips of the Reverend Mr. Falk were framing the hell it can't. Okay, so um, when he was going through the list, when he said the fix of the Southern sharecroppers, so basically that's referring to the Reconstruction after the Civil War. They basically retained slavery by the sharecropping process. Um, and there were black sharecroppers and white sharecroppers. The black sharecroppers were worse off, um, but it, during the Depression, they went through a really, really hard time where the cotton and the different crops like tobacco, um, the the price had dropped so much that they were having to throw away parts of their crops, and a lot of the sharecroppers got pushed off the land, um, and the poverty was just really bad. It was, unthinkable. And then when he said, "Are keeping are the working conditions of the miners and the garment makers," so um, that was referring to the beginning of the unions. Um, you know, Basically, a lot of these people get worked to death. Are keeping Mooney in prison for so many years. So there was a labor strike in California, and Tom Mooney was an Irish activist. An Irish immigrant who had worked, I think, in a mine, or he worked in some sort of factory. And he became an activist for labor unions. And there was a march in California, and it was a march for the employers were um, trying to band together against the unions, and someone had set off a bomb at the march, and Tom Mooney got arrested and thrown in jail for doing it. But there was evidence that he wasn't anywhere near where it went off, and so he was actually innocent, and they kept him in prison for um, a lot of years before they finally said no, he's innocent, and let him out. And then he died. Um, and then uh, Huey Long. Look how Huey Long became an absolute monarch over Louisiana. Huey Long, also known as the Kingfish, he was the governor of Louisiana, and um, people he was kind of a swindler, and he also his campaign slogan, I think it was "Every Man a King." Um, so people loved him, but he really didn't do anything other than just try to preserve his own um, authority and power. Tammany Hall, grafting, that was in New York. There was the political system in New York probably hasn't changed, but they used to do this thing called grafting, which was basically extorting money. And this one of the guys that became, I think he was the mayor. No, he was the treasurer. No, he was alderman. And his name was Boss Sneed, and he like brought it to a new level, and he extorted so much money. He had he was building the Tammany Hall courthouse, and I didn't really research it enough to know if it's still there, but he had this was in the 1800s. He had gotten permission, or he had gotten approved for a $250,000 budget to build a courthouse, but he ended up spending $3.5 million on it. And that was like most of it went into his bank account. And he left the country and went to Spain, but his characteristics were so unique because he was overweight and he just had a certain look. This cartoonist, gosh, I can't remember his name, but there was this, a well-known cartoonist back then, and he did all these political cartoons. He had drawn a cartoon of Boss Sneed, and it was in the paper. Spanish authorities caught Boss Sneed in Spain because they recognized him from um, the cartoon in the newspaper. Chicago gangs, that was like during the Prohibition, like Capone, stuff like that. Crookedness of so many of President Harding's appointees. President Harding, he was, I don't know which, it was in the 1900s. Anyway, he was like a really good looking guy who wasn't really that smart, and he really didn't want to be the president, but all of his friends wanted him to become president, and they were like, you could, basically I just imagine it like, you can do it. You look like a president. So anyway, he had been, several people had heard him say that he can't do this job, but anyway, he's considered one of the worst presidents ever because he didn't really do anything, and all he did was have mistresses, and he would have women come into the White House and or wherever he was, and the government would have to pay off his mistresses to keep him quiet, and basically his friends were basically appointees, his own appointees, and they made all the decisions for him. Yeah, and so Billy Sunday was a evangelist. Amy McPherson was an evangelist. Um, and oh, I don't really know who Tom Heflin and Tom Dixon are, but Al Smith, uh, where it says that the Republicans campaigning against Al Smith told the Carolina mountaineers that if Al won, the Pope would illegitimize their children. Al Smith was a Democrat that was running during the Prohibition, and he was against the Prohibition. So um, there was a lot of mudslinging toward him. Um, yeah, so basically, think that's enough for today. And thank you for listening, especially if you've gotten this all the way to the end of the video.